It took exactly 47 seconds for the atmosphere in the Senate hearing room to shift from cautious expectation to near-hushed disbelief. Kash Patel, seated at the witness table, adjusted his tie, a faint tremor in his right hand betraying the confidence he tried to project. Across the room, Thomas Massie leaned forward, a single sheet of paper in front of him, eyes narrowed but calm. Cameras clicked, lights reflected sharply off the polished mahogany table, and the faint hum of fluorescent bulbs above seemed to punctuate every heartbeat. The room itself carried weight. Tall marble columns framed the entrance, their veined surfaces gleaming under the harsh light. The walls were lined with portraits of former senators and pivotal moments in American legislative history, silent witnesses to today's unfolding drama. Microphones protruded like silent sentinels from the tables, capturing every whisper, every cough. A slight draft from the ventilation system stirred the papers on the desks, and the faint scratch of pens on legal pads mingled with the low murmur of aides exchanging last-minute notes. Every detail was designed to convey authority, permanence, and an unspoken threat. Here, mistakes would be remembered. Patel's gaze flicked toward the gallery. Reporters were tightly packed along the rear, their cameras trained on him, lenses reflecting tiny, scattered flashes of light. The audience was a mosaic of political operatives, former FBI agents, and law clerks, all waiting, silently judging. There was a sense that this hearing was more than a procedural check. It was a moral trial, a measured weighing of competence against duty. Thomas Massie's presence added a quiet gravity. His posture, rigid but not theatrical, suggested both patience and inevitability. His hands rested lightly on the table, fingers interlaced. When he spoke, it would be measured, surgical, designed to draw truths out of careful preparation and rehearsed deflection alike. Every senator present mirrored the tension, from the subtle tightening of fists under the table to the near imperceptible lean forward as they tracked Patel's every blink, every hesitative pause. The stakes were high. Patel's career, already shadowed by whispers of mishandled investigations and leaked memos, hung by a thread. The public had little knowledge of the documents Massie held, the names concealed under layers of redaction, but everyone present understood the weight. These were not abstract allegations. They were potential violations of statutory authority, executive oversight, and constitutional law. The Fifth Amendment's protections, the constraints of FISA 702, and the appropriations mandates governing federal investigative budgets were all silent yet omnipresent guards in this room. A clerk adjusted the microphone in front of Patel. The faint feedback hissed, then settled. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation. Cameras whirred softly, capturing each subtle movement, each micro-expression. Outside the room, in the corridors of power, aides whispered, trying to predict the outcome, trying to anticipate the dominoes that would fall if Patel stumbled. Inside, the audience remained statuesque, caught between duty and voyeurism, knowing that history often favors those who remain composed while chaos erupts around them. Patel took a slow, deliberate breath. He glanced at the documents before him, aware that one misstep, one factual slip, could unravel everything. Massie's eyes met his briefly, and the faintest nod suggested that the questioning would begin soon. Silence stretched. The Senate chamber seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in with invisible weight. But the silence wasn't over yet. The first question came quietly, almost politely, but it carried an undercurrent of inevitability. Senator Grace Whitman's voice cut through the fluorescent hum, calm and measured. "Mr. Patel, can you confirm whether the FBI maintained compliance with FISA Section 702 during the investigation into the individuals listed in the Massie documents?" Patel blinked, a faint tightening around his eyes. His fingers drummed lightly against the mahogany table, the rhythm betraying a nervous cadence. "Senator, all procedures were followed according to internal guidelines," he said, voice steady but lacking conviction. Massie interjected, leaning forward. "Mr. Patel, Section 702 requires that surveillance targeting U.S. persons adhere strictly to minimization procedures. Can you specify who approved these procedures and whether any deviations occurred?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Patel's face. He shifted in his seat, one hand brushing a stack of documents as if seeking reassurance from the paper itself. Approval followed the standard chain of command within the executive office. he replied, voice taut, eyes scanning the room for an invisible cue. The senator's questioning was surgical. Each sentence, each pause, was calibrated to uncover discrepancies without immediate confrontation. Senator Diego Marquez scribbled notes, his pen scratching softly against legal pads, occasionally glancing up to catch Patel's eye movement. Flashes of subtle tension, shifting feet, brief jaw tightening, a swallowed cough, betrayed the stress that words alone did not capture. Mr. Patel, Whitman continued, according to internal memos obtained by the Oversight Committee, several surveillance requests were delayed or never filed. Are you aware of these lapses? Patel hesitated longer this time, the silence stretching across the chamber. The faint hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder, more oppressive. Cameras clicked, capturing every micro-expression, every shallow breath. I am aware of the reports, he admitted finally, but I do not have direct oversight of every operational decision. Massie's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting that procedural compliance is absolved by delegation? Section 802 of the Appropriations Act clearly mandates accountability for all actions conducted under federal investigative authority. How do you reconcile that with your statements? A faint tremor in Patel's right hand became noticeable as he gripped the edge of the table. The senator's questioning combined legal pressure with visual tension. The way a camera lingers on a hand twitch or a shifting posture can speak louder than words. Senator, my understanding is that all actions fell within authorized parameters. Any lapses would have been procedural oversights, not intentional violations, he said, but the conviction was thin. Whitman leaned slightly forward, voice soft but sharp. Mr. Patel, can you confirm whether any of the 20 individuals identified by Congressman Massie were subject to surveillance without judicial approval? Patel's throat tightened. He glanced briefly at Massie, who remained motionless, almost statuesque. The papers before him seemed suddenly heavier, the room colder. Senator, I cannot confirm that at this time, he admitted, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. The senators exchanged subtle glances. The rising tension was not loud. It was in the minutiae, the pause before the next question, the slow adjustment of a pen, the flicker of disbelief in an aide's eyes. Each query, though calmly phrased, chipped away at the veneer of control Patel tried to maintain. Massie leaned forward slightly, voice low but firm. Mr. Patel, were there internal memos or communications that contradicted your testimony here today? Patel's hand stilled over the papers, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The camera caught the moment, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the shallow exhale, the way light glinted sharply off his glasses as he swallowed hard. The first cracks were visible, but the full fracture was yet to come. One answer could shatter the fragile order. The room seemed to shrink as the questioning deepened, the mahogany table reflecting the harsh fluorescent light like a cold mirror. Senator Marquez adjusted his glasses and slid a thick envelope across the table toward Patel. These are internal FBI memos and budget reports, he said quietly, voice even but precise. They indicate discrepancies between approved appropriations and operational expenditures related to the surveillance of the 20 individuals identified by Congressman Massie. Can you explain this? Patel's hand hovered over the papers, his fingers trembling slightly as he tried to maintain composure. He cleared his throat. Senator, I believe those documents reflect draft allocations. Final approvals were made, and all activities were authorized under existing protocols. Massie's eyes remained fixed, unyielding. Mr. Patel, draft allocations cannot authorize investigative action. The Appropriations Act, Section 503(b), explicitly prohibits expenditure without congressional approval. Were any operations conducted prior to final authorization? A bead of sweat formed along Patel's hairline. The camera caught a subtle tremor in his left hand, the slight quiver of a pen still in his grip. The room's silence deepened. Every soft scratch of a notepad, every click of a microphone switch, felt amplified. Senator, I cannot recall every operational timeline in precise detail, Patel said, his voice tighter, less controlled. Whitman leaned in, her tone calm but relentless. Mr. Patel, according to FISA Section 702, Surveillance targeting U.S. persons requires specific minimization protocols and reporting to the FISA court. Were any deviations from these requirements documented? And if so, why were they not reported? Patel glanced at the memos, then back at the senators. His eyes flicked briefly toward the gallery, where reporters' lenses reflected back tiny bursts of light. "Senator, I am not aware of any deviations being formally reported," he said. The words hung in the air like a verdict yet unspoken. Massie's voice was quiet, precise. "Let's be clear, Mr. Patel. Internal communications suggest that surveillance may have been conducted on individuals without proper judicial authorization. Were you aware of these communications?" Patel's jaw tightened. His hand shifted the papers, leaving a corner bent, a subtle sign of his mounting unease. "Senator, I was aware of general discussions, but not specific directives." Marquez tapped his pen against the table, a deliberate, rhythmic sound that echoed through the marble chamber. "Mr. Patel, the Fifth Amendment protects individuals against governmental overreach. If the FBI exceeded statutory limits, those protections were violated. Can you confirm that no U.S. persons were surveilled outside the scope of legal authority?" Patel's eyes darted, then returned to Massie's steady gaze. The room seemed to pause. The cameras clicked in new perfect sync, each frame capturing the tension. "Senator, I cannot confirm that with absolute certainty," he admitted. Whitman added, almost as an afterthought, "Mr. Patel, internal communications also reference missing or redacted budgets connected to these investigations. Section 503(b) of the Appropriations Act requires accurate reporting. How do you account for the discrepancies?" The subtle rise of tension was cinematic. A faint hum from the ventilation system punctuated the silence. Lights reflected sharply off the polished table, and the senator's eyes, sharp, probing, seemed to magnify every tremor, every hesitation. Patel shifted in his seat, blinking rapidly, hands tightening around the edge of the table. Massie's voice cut through the room with surgical calm. "Mr. Patel, for the record, these memos indicate that you may have knowingly misrepresented facts to Congress. Did you, in fact, mislead this body?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Cameras zoomed slightly, capturing the slight tightening of Patel's lips, the shallow inhale before an answer, the reflection of fluorescent light in his eyes. Every subtle movement broadcast vulnerability. Every hesitation amplified the gravity of the revelations. The contradictions could no longer be ignored. Internal memos, missing budgets, potential violations of FISA 702 and the Appropriations Act, all pointed toward an impending reckoning. The visual narrative, the trembling hands, the shifting papers, the cold light bouncing off mahogany, underscored a legal reality. Patel's credibility was eroding, moment by meticulous moment. The hearing had escalated beyond procedure. It had become a cinematic exposure of systemic failure. The contradictions couldn't be ignored. It began with a subtle hitch in Patel's voice, a single, fractured syllable that seemed almost insignificant. Then came the pause. Cameras clicked rapidly, lenses capturing the almost imperceptible widening of his eyes. The Senate chamber, already tense, became electrically silent. For 4 to 7 seconds, the room held its collective breath, watching a career unravel in real time. Massie leaned forward, voice calm, deliberate. "Mr. Patel, you've testified that all actions were authorized and compliant. Yet these internal memos, the redacted budget reports, and the surveillance logs contradict your statements. Can you reconcile this?" Patel's hands, which had been gripping the mahogany table with a fragile semblance of control, began to tremble visibly. His jaw tightened, then slackened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "Senator, his voice cracked. The words failed him, the carefully rehearsed narrative collapsing under scrutiny. Whitman's eyes narrowed, her tone low but precise. "Mr. Patel, Section 503(b) of the Appropriations Act mandates accountability for federal expenditures. FISA 702 requires minimization and judicial oversight. Multiple violations appear evident. How do you explain knowingly authorizing operations without compliance? Patel's breath caught. His pen fell to the floor with a soft clatter that echoed ominously across the chamber. Every eye in the room followed the motion. Even the microphones seemed to amplify it. For 47 seconds, he fumbled with papers, struggling to locate a coherent defense. The cameras recorded each fleeting tremor, each hesitative glance toward Massie. The visual narrative was undeniable. Uncertainty, fear, and exposure all in one frame. He tried again, voice breaking, there must be. I mean, the approvals. His words dissolved into stammered fragments, the logic he relied upon evaporating under the combined weight of statutes, memos, and the senator's piercing attention. Massie's hand rested lightly on the table, unwavering. Mr. Patel, these lapses constitute both administrative and constitutional violations. Due process was compromised, statutory authority exceeded, and internal oversight bypassed. Do you acknowledge your failure to maintain compliance? Patel's eyes darted toward the documents. The memos, budget sheets, and surveillance logs, all meticulously annotated, seemed to mock him. His lips parted, then closed. Silence fell again, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scratch of Whitman's pen as she took notes. In that 4 to 7 second stretch, the legal and visual collapse was total. Forensic precision in the memos, statutory language from FISA 702, and constitutional logic combined to expose the flaw. The violation of due process, the failure to secure judicial authorization, the mismanagement of allocated budgets, rendered Patel's testimony legally indefensible. Every procedural safeguard, every clause intended to protect U.S. citizens, had been compromised in those brief moments of indecision. The senators remained statuesque, absorbing the magnitude of the collapse. The gallery and press, trained on every micro-expression, recorded the silent unraveling. Cameras captured the tremor of Patel's fingers, the shallow intake of breath, the darting gaze, the way the fluorescent light reflected sharply on his forehead. This was not merely a verbal failure, it was an embodied, cinematic depiction of systemic vulnerability. Whitman finally leaned back slightly, voice steady. For 47 seconds, Mr. Patel, you failed to maintain compliance with federal law. The consequences are unavoidable. And in those seconds, everything changed. By the time Patel left the Senate chamber, the aftermath had already erupted across every screen in the country. News anchors spoke in clipped, urgent tones, replaying the 47-second collapse repeatedly, frame by frame. Constitutional scholars called it the most devastating Senate takedown since Watergate. One anchor intoned, the words reverberating through living rooms and offices alike. Another added, for 4 to 7 seconds, America watched competence collapse under the weight of legal scrutiny. Social media amplified the spectacle. Clips of Patel's trembling hands and fractured sentences went viral, dissected by political commentators, law students, and former federal investigators alike. Hashtags like #FISAFail and #MassieExposed trended nationwide within hours. Opinion pieces highlighted the legal implications: mismanagement of FISA 702 surveillance, misallocation of Appropriations Act funds, and potential violation of the Due Process Clause. Inside the FBI, the fallout was immediate. Senior officials convened emergency briefings, scanning the internal memos Massie had introduced into the public record. Discussions were hushed but urgent. What systemic failures allowed Patel to misrepresent compliance? Which investigative actions now required retroactive review? Analysts cross-referenced logs, budgets, and memos, each discovery compounding the sense of institutional vulnerability. Political consequences rippled through Capitol Hill. Senate committees called for additional hearings, DOJ officials were asked to provide statements, and congressional aides drafted letters questioning oversight practices. Law journals and think tanks published instant analyses, highlighting procedural gaps that allowed someone in Patel's position to exert authority without sufficient checks. The constitutional ramifications were dissected meticulously. Section 503(b) of the Appropriations Act had been bypassed, FISA 702 minimization protocols were incomplete, and the Fifth Amendment's protections had been potentially endangered. Patel's personal and professional credibility was now in ruins. Colleagues described him as withdrawn and anxious, a stark contrast to the confident figure who had entered the hearing. Political operatives noted that his ability to influence policy was effectively nullified. Any statements he made on federal investigative matters would be met with skepticism. Journalists spoke of a man publicly undone, a cautionary tale in real-time accountability. Meanwhile, Thomas Massie's reputation soared. Analysts highlighted his methodical precision, unwavering composure, and legal acuity. His calm demeanor had orchestrated the narrative, allowing the evidence to speak louder than theatrics. Media outlets praised his surgical questioning and moral clarity, portraying him as the embodiment of congressional diligence. Across the country, public perception solidified. Citizens debated not only the individual failings of Patel but the broader implications for accountability within federal agencies. Discussions spilled into law school classrooms, political forums, and dinner table conversations. The role of oversight, the fragility of compliance, and the consequences of neglecting constitutional duty. The narrative of collapse, now firmly etched in public memory, set the stage for reform proposals. Calls for stricter oversight of surveillance operations, transparency in budget reporting, and robust checks against unilateral decision-making proliferated. The combination of legal failure, public spectacle, and media amplification had created a perfect storm, a national reckoning that was both cinematic and real. But the public scrutiny had only begun. Weeks later, the Senate chamber felt smaller, almost empty, the echoes of that 4-7-second collapse lingering in the marble corridors. The lights still glared off polished mahogany, but the tension had shifted from immediate confrontation to measured reflection. Analysts, legal scholars, and lawmakers dissected the hearing repeatedly, not for drama but for lessons in law, ethics, and governance. Every procedural failure, every overlooked memo, every misstep by Patel became a study in accountability. The moral weight of the affair was palpable. For all its cinematic spectacle, the collapse revealed systemic vulnerabilities, the human propensity for oversight failure, the thin line between authority and irresponsibility, and the silent power of constitutional law to both protect and expose. FISA 702 had been designed to safeguard U.S. citizens from overreach, the Appropriations Act to ensure fiscal responsibility, the Fifth Amendment to preserve due process. When those protections were ignored or misapplied, consequences were inevitable and precise, not arbitrary. Massie's role remained emblematic of careful vigilance. His questions had been measured, legal, morally anchored, cutting through layers of bureaucracy with surgical precision. He had reminded the nation that oversight was not symbolic. It was a constitutional and practical duty. Yet, the episode also highlighted a quiet, uncomfortable truth. Systems could fail even when rules were explicit, and personal accountability could be as fragile as paper in the wind. Patel, meanwhile, had retreated from public life. His career, once poised for influence within federal operations, was irreversibly altered. He became a case study in the press, a reminder that authority untempered by scrutiny is a liability. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones, acknowledging both the individual's mistakes and the institutional gaps that allowed them to occur. The FBI and congressional oversight bodies launched internal reviews, not for spectacle, but to fortify the structures Patel had exposed. Outside the marble halls, the public absorbed the lessons slowly. Conversations shifted from gossip to principles, the limits of executive authority, the importance of procedural compliance, and the enduring weight of constitutional law. The cinematic intensity of the hearing, the hand tremors, the flashing cameras, the silence stretched to 4-7 seconds, had left a mark, but the deeper lesson was sober. Accountability is relentless, and the law indifferent to status, titles, or confidence. As light filtered through the tall windows of the Senate chamber, casting long shadows across the tables and chairs, one symbolic truth crystallized. Washington does not punish ignorance, it replaces it. Careers may crumble, reputations may falter, but the machinery of oversight, the silent architecture of constitutional law, endures. The chamber, once a stage for spectacle, had returned to quiet vigilance, carrying forward both the weight and the lesson of that historic day. Some careers end in scandal. His ended in silence.